Some hearts choose love long before they ever learn to walk. That line stayed with me as I crafted today's story, a story that moved me to tears more than once. This isn't just about a boy and his puppies. It's about a father's unshakable belief, a neighbor's quiet love, and the miracle that sometimes hides in the smallest movement. Welcome to Vale Marks, where stories are more than just tales. They're reflections of courage, connection, and hope. This video carries a message that might change the way you see healing and love. So stay until the very end, because the moment you'll witness is one you'll never forget. The house was quiet. So quiet, in fact, that even the hum of the refrigerator seemed too loud. Perched high in the Colorado mountains, nestled between tall pine trees and stretches of wind-swept fields, the little cabin had once echoed with laughter and the gentle chaos of a young couple preparing for parenthood. But now, it was silent. Eerily silent. The kind of silence that settles deep in the walls after grief has passed through like a storm. Logan Miller sat in the nursery that hadn't changed much since his wife, Claire, passed away. The mobile above the crib still spun lazily from a breeze that no one felt. Stuffed animals sat untouched on the shelf. And in the center of it all, on a custom-built foam mat, lay their son, Aiden, 1 year old, big, beautiful eyes, and completely still. Aiden had been born with spinal cord trauma after a complicated delivery. The doctors had used terms like neurological disruption and motor impairment. What it meant, in reality, was this. Aiden couldn't move his arms or legs, couldn't speak, couldn't even sit up. His muscles barely responded to stimulation. They told Logan, in the gentlest voices they could muster, that this was likely a lifelong condition. But no words, no scientific terminology, could prepare him for what it felt like to look into his son's eyes and see no reaction, no smile, no flinch, no spark. For Logan, the man who had spent 10 years charging into burning buildings, dragging strangers from danger with soot-stained hands, this was the one thing he could not fix. Fire he could fight. Collapse he could escape. But how do you battle silence? How do you rescue your child from a prison made of his own body? Every night, after brushing Aiden's hair and adjusting the small oxygen tube that helped regulate his breathing, Logan would sit beside him. Sometimes he'd talk. Other times he'd hum a tune Claire used to sing. Most of the time he just listened to the quiet, hoping, aching for even the smallest twitch. A sigh. A blink. Something. But Aiden never responded. Until one night. It had been another exhausting day of therapy sessions that yielded nothing new. Logan had gone to bed later than usual, the house blanketed in darkness. And in his dreams, he saw her. Claire stood in the nursery, bathed in soft golden light, just as he remembered, calm, radiant, with that tired but glowing smile she always wore when she talked to their unborn son. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood 3 puppies. They were small, round-bellied, and full of curiosity. One had floppy ears, another a bright white patch across its chest, and the third kept tripping over its own paws. Claire looked at Logan and, without speaking, nodded toward Aiden's crib. That's when it happened. Aiden, who had never smiled, not once in the waking world, giggled. Not just a grin, not a reflex twitch of the mouth, but a full, open-mouthed baby laugh. Logan watched in the dream. Frozen, heart pounding. Claire bent down, gently scooped Aiden into her arms, and placed him near the puppies. They circled him, tails wagging. Aiden reached out, and one of the puppies nuzzled his hand. Then Logan woke up. It was still dark. The oxygen machine was humming. The baby monitor glowed faintly on the nightstand. Aiden lay in the same position, unmoving. But Logan sat up differently that night. Eyes wide, heart restless. The dream hadn't been just a dream. It was a calling, a flicker of something long buried under sorrow and fear. Hope. and that somehow made all the difference. Logan woke up before dawn, the memory of the dream still clinging to his skin like morning mist. Claire's face, the puppies, the sound of Aiden's laughter, it had all felt so real, too real. It wasn't the kind of dream you brushed off and forgot over coffee. It lingered, whispering to him as he moved through his morning routine. He brewed a pot of coffee but barely touched it, made Aiden's bottle, checked his vitals, gently adjusted his position on the mat in the living room. Then he stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the front door as if expecting it to open on its own. That's when he grabbed his coat. He didn't plan it. He didn't even check the weather. He just got in his truck and started driving with no real destination in mind. The roads were quiet, still damp from the previous night's rain, and the clouds above the mountain ridge were hanging low. It should have been a gloomy drive, but Logan felt something tugging at him, like a thread pulling his chest forward. 20 minutes later, he found himself pulling into the gravel lot of a local animal shelter he'd passed dozens of times before but never entered. The sign was old, slightly tilted, and the fencing around the yard looked worn, patched in places with mismatched panels. A single porch light was still on, even though the sky was already turning pale gray with morning. Logan didn't know why he was there, but something in his gut said, "You'll know when you see them." The woman who opened the shelter's door looked surprised to see anyone that early. She was older, kind-faced, with gray curls tucked into a knit cap. Her name tag read, Kathy. "Can I help you?" she asked, blinking through the morning haze. I think I need a dog," Logan replied. Then, after a beat, he added, "Maybe 3. Kathy raised an eyebrow but didn't laugh. She'd seen stranger things in her years running the place. Without a word, she stepped aside and motioned him in. The air inside the shelter smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp fur. Rows of kennels stretched along the corridor, most of them occupied by dogs of varying size and temperament. A few barked as he walked by, others simply watched. But as Logan turned the corner, he stopped cold. In a pen off to the side, separated from the others, were 3 small puppies, each one no more than 8 weeks old. A sign on the gate read, "Survivors, Fire Rescue Litter." Kathy noticed his expression and nodded. "Those 3 came in last week. Their mother didn't make it. They were pulled out of a fire near Mesa Ridge. We weren't sure they'd survive the first night, but they did." Logan knelt down in front of the gate. The 3 puppies stirred. One, with sandy fur and a confident stance, walked straight up to the bars and bumped his head against them, tail wagging like he recognized Logan. The second, smaller and darker with deep, soulful eyes, stayed back, peeking out shyly from behind a blanket. The third, a clumsy little thing with 2 big paws, darted forward, tripped over his own feet, and immediately started chewing the lace of Logan's boot. Logan laughed out loud for the first time in what felt like years. The bold one he'd later name Scout, the one who seemed unafraid of anything. The quiet one, Willow, gentle, watchful, almost delicate. And the playful one, Finn, who couldn't sit still for more than a second and had already untied Logan's shoe. "They're from the same litter?" Logan asked. Kathy nodded. "Yep, brothers and sister. We were hoping someone might adopt them together, but that's a big ask." Logan didn't hesitate. "I'll take them." Kathy blinked. "All 3? He nodded slowly, a strange calm settling in his chest. "They belong with me." There were forms to sign, of course, and Kathy insisted on going over care instructions. She warned him about teething, socialization, crate training, all the usual puppy concerns. But Logan barely heard any of it. His mind was somewhere else. With Claire. With Aiden. With the feeling that, for the first time in months, he was doing something that made sense. Not logical sense, maybe. Not medical or financial sense, but soul-deep, gut-level, instinctual sense. He looked down at the 3 puppies, now snoozing in a soft crate Kathy had lent him for transport, their tiny bodies huddled together like they always had been. They smelled faintly of smoke and antiseptic and something else, something wild and warm and alive. As he buckled them into the passenger seat, Logan couldn't help but whisper, "You're coming home, little ones. My son doesn't need more machines. He needs something real, something breathing, something that'll stay." The drive back up the mountain felt different. He glanced over at the crate every few minutes, heart full of something he hadn't felt in ages. Anticipation. He wasn't sure how Aiden would respond. He wasn't even sure what he was expecting. But he didn't care. What mattered was that, for the first time in a long time, he had chosen to believe in life instead of waiting for it to show up. When he pulled into the driveway, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long golden rays across the porch. The puppies stirred, one of them yawning with a tiny squeak. Logan smiled. "Let's go meet your boy," he whispered. He picked up the crate with both hands, careful not to jostle them, and headed for the front door. And as he stepped inside, heart pounding with a mix of fear and faith, Logan thought of Claire's eyes in the dream and the way she'd nodded toward Aiden's crib. He didn't have proof. He didn't need it. Some decisions are made with the mind, others with the heart. And this one was made with love. The morning sunlight filtered in through the living room curtains, casting soft golden rectangles on the floor. It was the first morning with the puppies, and the air inside the house felt different. Warmer somehow. Lighter. The silence that had long haunted every room seemed to hesitate now, reluctant to settle in. For the first time in months, Logan felt like the walls of his home were breathing again. He had laid out a clean, padded mat near the fireplace. Aiden, freshly bathed and dressed in a soft cotton onesie with stars on the sleeves, lay quietly on his back as usual. His small chest rose and fell with slow, shallow breaths. His eyes, always distant, always somewhere else, stared up toward the ceiling. It was the same every day, until today. Logan gently opened the crate, and the three puppies spilled out in a clumsy tumble of fur and energy. Finn was the first to dash across the floor, tail wagging furiously, his oversized paws thudding against the wooden boards. Scout followed close behind, his little ears perked as he trotted confidently toward Aiden's mat. Willow moved more slowly. She padded with gentle steps, cautious but curious, her head tilted as she took in the still, silent child on the floor. The moment they reached the mat, something changed. Willow, sensing something tender, lowered herself beside Aiden. Her small body curled up near his legs, not touching, but close enough to share warmth. Scout barked once, softly, almost as if testing the air. Finn, ever the mischievous one, picked up a soft, plush toy with his mouth and trotted over, dropping it right next to Aiden's hand. Logan stood at the edge of the mat, heart in his throat, not daring to move. The puppies wriggled, sniffed, and flopped around, their tiny bodies radiating energy and curiosity, and Aiden remained still. For a moment. Then, something flickered in the boy's eyes. Logan leaned in, barely breathing. Aiden's gaze, so often empty, suddenly focused. His eyes, those big, round, soulful eyes, shifted toward the movement beside him. First toward Finn, who was now nudging the toy a little closer, then toward Scout, who barked again, this time a bit louder, tail wagging, and finally toward Willow, who was now resting her chin gently on her paws, eyes half-lidded in contentment. And then, impossibly, it happened. A sound, barely there, escaped from Aiden's lips. It was not a cry. It was not a grunt of discomfort. It was something softer, lighter, almost musical. It was a laugh, a tiny, cracked, wind-like giggle, like air catching on the edge of a smile. Logan's hands trembled. He knelt down, eyes wide. "Aiden?" he whispered, afraid even his voice might shatter the moment. But Aiden didn't stop. His lips curled, his breath hitched, and another fragile giggle escaped. It was the sound of a boy seeing wonder for the first time. Logan's heart pounded in his chest, tears already welling in his eyes. He couldn't believe it. He wouldn't have believed it if he hadn't heard it with his own ears. His son, who had never smiled, never laughed, never made a sound outside of faint cries as an infant, was responding. To them. To these wild, silly, imperfect little puppies. Suddenly, a knock came at the front door. Startled, Logan rushed over, wiping his face with his sleeve. When he opened the door, he found his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Helen Thatcher, standing there with a puzzled expression. "I thought I heard something," she said, her voice gentle. "Sounded like a baby?" Logan nodded, still stunned. It was Aiden. Helen blinked, then stepped in slowly. She had known Logan since he and Claire moved into the cabin 3 years ago. After Claire's passing, she'd quietly offered food and the occasional casserole, but she never intruded. Now, as she stepped into the living room and saw Aiden, eyes alive, face lit with the faintest smile, her breath caught. Helen sank into the armchair by the window. Her hand covered her mouth as she watched the scene before her. The baby, the 3 puppies circling like planets around a fragile sun, and Logan, sitting on the edge of the mat with tears in his eyes. "I haven't heard that sound since—" Helen paused, blinking hard. "Since my grandson. He was born with cerebral palsy. He didn't live past 3, but I remember the day he laughed, just once. That sound, it stays with you forever." There was a long pause. Logan looked at her, his throat tight. "I didn't think I'd ever hear it from him," he said quietly. Helen smiled gently. "Then don't let go of it." She stood, walked back to her house next door, and returned 10 minutes later holding something wrapped in a soft cloth. "This," she said, unwrapping the item, "used to hang above my grandson's crib. Inside was a small silver bell, simple and slightly tarnished, with a soft, delicate chime. I want you to have it," she said, handing it to Logan. "If Aiden's eyes can follow sound, maybe this will help. Let him chase the light with his ears first." Logan took the bell reverently, hands still shaking. That evening, he tied the little bell onto a blue fabric ribbon and gently looped it around Scout's neck. The puppy barely noticed the new accessory, happily trotting around with his tail in the air. Every time Scout moved, the bell gave off a soft, melodic ring. Aiden's eyes followed it. Again and again, Logan watched with disbelief as his son's head shifted ever so slightly toward the direction of the sound. His breath would quicken, eyes wide. The connection was fragile, but it was real. The laughter didn't return that evening, but something far more powerful remained. Focus. For a child whose body had long refused to interact with the world, even these micro-movements felt monumental. That night, Logan sat by the fireplace, the puppies curled around his feet, Aiden asleep nearby with one hand resting near Willow's paw. The silver bell gave a faint chime as Scout shifted in his sleep. And for the first time since Claire passed, Logan didn't feel like he was merely surviving. He felt like something had begun. A quiet turning of the tide. A miracle not made of lightning or thunder, but of soft paws, gentle bells, and a forgotten laugh brought back to life. The days settled into a rhythm. Though calling it a routine felt too generous. It was more like a quiet, ongoing act of survival, barely stitched together by habit and a sense of duty that Logan couldn't put into words. He woke up before the sun every morning, even before the birds began their soft songs across the pines. The cabin was still and cold at that hour, and his bones ached more than they used to. Some of it was age. Most of it was exhaustion. He would tiptoe around the creaky floorboards, careful not to wake Aiden, who still slept under a sky-themed blanket in the living room. Then he'd boil water for coffee, slice bananas for the puppies, and scramble eggs for himself. Though half the time he forgot to eat. The puppies, on the other hand, ate like little machines. Scout was always the first to finish, Finn always made a mess, and Willow waited politely, stealing glances at Aiden every few seconds, as if already guarding him. After feeding them, Logan would check Aiden's vitals, stretch his limbs gently, and begin the exercises he'd researched late into the nights. Passive movement, joint compression, light tactile therapy. His hands had once pulled people from fire. Now they moved with tender purpose, coaxing life into a little boy who barely blinked. But fatigue? It clung to Logan like a second skin. Some nights he slept in 30-minute bursts, sometimes not at all. There were nights Aiden whimpered in his sleep and Logan jolted upright, convinced something was wrong. Other nights the pups would cry from their pen, needing comfort, food, or just a warm hand. He tended to everyone before himself, and it showed. His beard grew patchier. The lines under his eyes deepened. The scar on his forearm, earned in a house fire 7 years ago, ached in the cold. But he never complained. Because deep down, he believed this was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or declarations, but the quiet choice to get up again. Every day, every hour, for someone who couldn't yet ask for it. Finances, however, were a cruel companion. Logan had taken an early medical retirement after Claire passed, unable to continue firefighting while also caring for a newborn with high needs. The benefits helped, but not enough. Between Aiden's therapy appointments, formula, diapers, medications, and now 3 growing puppies with their own needs, his savings thinned out like paper soaked in water. He tried selling old gear online, tools, jackets, even his vintage guitar. A neighbor offered him yard work for cash, but he declined. He didn't have time. Every moment was spoken for. He considered remote work, something flexible. But the logistics felt impossible when Aiden required near-constant care. Still, he pressed on. Each day was built from fragments of hope. It was during one of those days, one with a gray sky and heavier than usual silence, that Caleb arrived. Caleb was a physical therapy student in his final year of graduate school, sent by the clinic to shadow Aiden's progress as part of his fieldwork. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with kind eyes and a notepad always tucked under his arm. He'd been to the cabin once before, but this time felt different. He hadn't expected much, based on the earlier prognosis notes. Minimal responsiveness, low engagement, unlikely to initiate movement. But the moment he stepped inside and saw Aiden, something changed. Aiden was lying on the mat, head slightly tilted, eyes locked on Willow, who was pacing just beyond his feet, the little bell on her collar softly ringing. Caleb crouched down, quietly observing. "He's tracking," he said aloud, more to himself than anyone. Logan, sitting nearby with a mug of now-cold coffee, nodded without much fanfare. "Started a few days ago. It's subtle, but it's real." Caleb jotted something down. "That's significant." Willow circled closer, and Aiden's eyes followed. His lips moved slightly, as though trying to form a sound. Caleb looked at Logan again. "This is more engagement than I expected." Logan didn't smile, not fully, but a spark flickered in his eyes. The same spark that had once guided him through burning stairwells, through collapsed buildings, through hopelessness. "I used to run into buildings on fire," he said quietly. "People called it brave. But that was easy." Caleb raised an eyebrow, unsure how to respond. Logan turned to face him fully, voice steady but thick with weariness. "Keeping the fire alive in my son, keeping hope alive in this house, that's the hardest battle I've ever fought, and the only one I'm not allowed to lose." There was a long pause between them. Outside, a soft breeze rustled the pine trees. Inside, the only sound was the bell around Willow's neck and the faint hum of Aiden's breathing monitor. Caleb looked around the cabin, the walls marked with age, the stack of unpaid bills on the side table, the 3 puppies now curled up beside the baby. It wasn't clinical, it wasn't textbook therapy, but it was working. He closed his notebook slowly. "Would you mind if I came back more often?" Logan looked at him surprised. "Even if it's not part of your assignment?" Caleb gave a small smile. "I think I might learn more here than in any classroom." That evening, after Caleb left, Logan stood by the window watching the sunset bleed into the hills. The sky was gold and rose and blue all at once. The puppies slept in a pile. Aiden had just fallen asleep, hand curled loosely beside Finn's tail. Logan's body ached, his eyes burned. But in his chest, something warm pushed back against the weariness. It was the kind of flame that doesn't roar. It glows, quiet, steady, defiant. And Logan knew, if he could keep that flame alive one more day, it would be enough. As the days passed, Logan began to notice something subtle but powerful. Something that couldn't be explained by therapy textbooks or clinical charts. Each of the 3 puppies seemed to have carved out their own unique role in Aiden's small, still world. And in that strange, delicate balance between instinct and coincidence, Logan witnessed something extraordinary. These puppies weren't just companions, they were bridges. Scout, ever the bold one, had a bark that came in short, clipped bursts. Not too loud, but enough to catch attention. He often trotted around the living room with his tiny silver bell chiming softly. Whenever Scout barked, Aiden's head would twitch slightly toward the sound. Not every time, but enough. Enough to give Logan pause. Enough to make him lean in and watch, hope rising like steam from a morning mug. Willow was the calmest of the 3. She had a softness about her, an old soul in a puppy's body. She often nestled herself against Aiden's side without prompting, lying there as if she belonged to him. Logan began to notice that when Willow curled beside his son, Aiden's breathing slowed, his heartbeat steadied, and the usual flutters of distress disappeared. There was something about Willow's quiet presence that grounded the boy, like a lighthouse casting its glow through fog. And then there was Finn, the mischief maker, the spark. Finn loved to push things around the room. Socks, slippers, little stuffed toys. His favorite, a soft red fabric bone, often ended up near Aiden's arm. Every morning, Logan found the bone tucked beside Aiden like a message from the night before. It was Finn who seemed to understand play. He would gently nudge the bone toward Aiden's hand over and over again. Not with force, not expecting a toss or a fetch, but as if inviting Aiden into the rhythm of interaction. As if to say, "You don't have to move far, just notice me. I'm here." These gestures were small, almost imperceptible. But to Logan, they were monumental. He began keeping a journal, documenting each interaction. Scout barked. Aiden turned his eyes. Willow lay beside him today. He didn't cry once. Finn nudged the bone 4 times. I think Aiden's fingers twitched. It became his obsession, tracking hope, measuring it in inches and seconds and glances. Because in a world where doctors had warned him not to expect anything, even a moment of focus felt like a revolution. And then, one night, it happened. It had been a long day. Logan was exhausted. The power had flickered off twice during a storm, and Aiden had been irritable, crying more than usual. The puppies, sensing the tension, had remained quiet. Logan had finally gotten Aiden settled, dimmed the lights, and collapsed into a chair beside the mat. His eyes closed for only a second, or so he thought. He awoke to a faint sound. At first, he thought it was the wind against the window pane, then maybe the rhythmic chime of Scout's bell. But no, it was something else, a voice, tiny, raspy, almost like the wind had grown vocal cords. "In." Logan's eyes flew open. He froze. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a night lamp. Willow was dozing at Aiden's side, Finn sitting nearby with the red toy between his paws, ears perked. Aiden's lips moved again, barely parting, but the sound came through, as fragile and real as breath. In! Logan's chest tightened. He scrambled for his phone, activated the voice recorder, and leaned in, heart pounding. There it was again. Not perfect, not loud, not clear, but undeniably intentional. Aiden wasn't crying. He wasn't groaning. He was calling Finn, the boy who had never spoken a syllable. The child, they said, might never form language, was whispering the name of a puppy. Logan sat back on his heels, the phone still recording, tears silently tracking down his face. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just stared at his son, in awe of the impossible. In that moment, Logan realized this wasn't just progress. It was connection. Aiden had formed a bond so deep, so natural, that it bypassed machines, drills, and therapists. He hadn't been prompted. He hadn't been trained. He simply loved. And in loving, he reached beyond his limitations and spoke. That single whispered syllable meant more than any diagnosis, more than any chart. It was the first time Logan had heard his son direct his voice toward another living being. And it wasn't to a person, or a machine, or a light-up toy. It was to a warm, clumsy, happy little creature who refused to give up nudging his toy forward, no matter how little response he got. Finn crawled closer now, resting his chin on Aiden's arm as if he knew. And maybe, just maybe, he did. Logan reached over and gently touched Aiden's forehead, voice trembling. "You said his name, buddy," he whispered. "You said it." That night, Logan didn't sleep. He sat with his back against the wall, eyes on his son and the puppies. And when the sun rose over the mountains and light spilled into the living room, everything felt different, as if the world had shifted a little closer to healing, not because of a breakthrough in therapy, but because sound had become a bridge, and love had become the first word. The morning began like any other, the kind of spring morning that crept into the room gently, as if not wanting to disturb. Pale sunlight filtered through the windows, casting soft, golden lines across the hardwood floor. The fire had burned low during the night, and the room held a lingering hush, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Logan had been up for hours, not from restlessness, but from something else, an ache that had become familiar, the aching hope that maybe today would be different. He had just finished giving Aiden his morning care. Clean diaper, new onesie with a little bear on the chest, his head propped gently with a rolled towel under the soft playmat. The boy lay there, motionless as always, yet so quietly aware. His eyes were open, watching the light. That, in itself, was something Logan never took for granted. The puppies stirred lazily. Willow gave a soft yawn and stretched out, her long body curving around the edge of the mat like a protective crescent. Scout gave a sleepy bark and shook his head. His collar jingling softly, the bell around his neck ringing out a note so delicate it felt like a song from another world. And that sound, that tiny, silvery chime, sent a ripple through the silence. Aiden's eyelids fluttered. Logan froze, mid-step, one hand on the edge of the sofa. He didn't speak, didn't breathe. He watched. Scout's tail wagged lazily as he trotted around the mat, the bell chiming again. Finn, ever the initiator, saw the moment, sensed the shift. He trotted forward, the red plush toy in his mouth, and gently set it down, right at the edge of Aiden's small hand. Willow opened her eyes, head lifting slightly, and fixed her gaze on Aiden, as if she knew this morning was different. And it was. Because for the first time in nearly a year of silence and stillness, something changed. It began with Aiden's eyes. They followed Scout, then flicked to the red toy now nestled against his hand, Logan crouched, heart pounding, not daring to interfere, his breath caught in his throat. Aiden's fingers, limp, soft, often curled uselessly, trembled. It was small, barely noticeable, but Logan saw it. Then slowly, like the rise of a tide, Aiden's entire arm lifted, just half an inch, then a full inch. The movement was unsteady, fragile, as if his muscles had to fight through cement to respond. His little hand wavered in the air, fingers splayed awkwardly. But it moved. It moved. Logan's eyes widened, his lips parted, his heart hammered like it might break out of his chest. Aiden's fingers brushed the toy, just the edge. Then, miraculously, they kept going. They landed on something soft, warm, and very much alive. Finn. The pup didn't flinch, didn't jump or pull away. He simply looked up at Aiden, those big puppy eyes blinking with innocent calm. Then gently, Finn leaned into the touch. It wasn't just a touch. It was connection. It was intention. Aiden's hand, still shaky, still barely lifted from the ground, pressed softly into Finn's fur. Logan choked on a sob that escaped before he could stop it. Behind him, a quiet gasp filled the room. It was Mrs. Helen, standing in the doorway, a cup of tea in her trembling hands. She had stopped by, as she often did, with a warm drink and a few gentle words. But this she hadn't expected. The cup rattled in her saucer. Her eyes filled instantly. "Oh," she whispered, one hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God. He's touching him. He's really touching him." At that moment, Caleb stepped in, having arrived early for his scheduled observation. He froze as well, his clipboard slipping from his hand, forgotten on the floor. He watched in stunned silence as Aiden's tiny fingers gripped a handful of Finn's fur, just barely, but enough. Then Caleb did something unexpected. He reached out and grabbed Logan's arm, tight, steadying. And Logan? He collapsed to his knees, shaking, the weight of months of grief and silent hope finally crashing down. He buried his face in his hands and wept. Not out of sadness. Not this time. It was joy. Wild, uncontrolled, heart-shaking joy. The kind that only comes after standing in the dark for so long you forget what light even looks like. Helen knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Caleb crouched at his other side, his eyes misty. "That wasn't reflex," he said softly. "That was a choice. That was purposeful movement. Logan." He reached. Logan looked up at his son, who now seemed more awake than ever. Aiden's eyes were still wide, his hand still resting on Finn, who had begun to lick the small fingers gently. The connection held. It was real. For nearly a year, Logan had fought against silence, against the stillness that filled every room, against the doubt that whispered cruel truths in the quietest hours. But here, in the spring light on a simple play mat, with 3 puppies bearing witness, that silence shattered. Aiden had not only responded, he had reached, he had chosen. Logan wiped his tears with the back of his hand and whispered, voice shaking, "You did it, buddy. You really did it." That morning, no one left the house right away. Helen stayed. Caleb canceled his next appointment. The puppies curled around the baby, and Logan sat in the middle of it all, watching his son breathe, watching his son begin. Because in that moment, everything had changed. It wasn't just therapy anymore. It wasn't just a desperate experiment. It was the spark of life, the miracle they had been waiting for. And it began, with the brush of a hand against fur. The house felt different now, not just quieter or louder, but fuller. As if something had taken root in its walls and begun to bloom. The silence that once lingered like a fog had lifted, replaced by soft sounds that filled the corners of each room. The gentle thump of puppy paws, the occasional chime from Scout's little bell, the hum of the kettle in the kitchen, and Aiden's breathing, still slow, still fragile, but no longer alone. After that unforgettable morning, the day Aiden reached for Finn, the day he chose to connect, everything changed. Not in sudden dramatic leaps, but in subtle, meaningful shifts that Logan noticed in the quiet moments between sunrise and bedtime. Aiden had not been cured. He didn't suddenly sit up or crawl across the room. But now, when Logan placed the red plush toy near his hand, there was purpose in the way his fingers curled toward it. When the puppies approached, his eyes lit up. Sometimes, when Finn nuzzled his cheek, Aiden would whisper something only Logan could interpret. Broken sounds, yes, but full of effort. And effort was everything. Caleb, the young student therapist who had witnessed that breakthrough, returned often, more as a friend than an observer now. He asked Logan, carefully, if he could include Aiden's story in his final thesis, not as a case study in recovery, but as an example of what connection could do where traditional therapy sometimes fell short. "This isn't just progress," Caleb told him one afternoon as they sat watching Willow lie protectively across Aiden's legs. "This is what happens when love leads the way, and I think more people need to understand that." Logan agreed, but he wanted to go further. In the weeks that followed, he set up a small video camera. Nothing fancy, just something he could clip to a shelf or balance on a stack of books. He began recording short moments throughout their days, Finn nudging the red toy closer, Scout ringing his bell near Aiden's ear, Willow curling her body around the baby like a warm pillow. He didn't know if anyone would care to watch, but he had to tell the story. He called the channel The Fire Within. It was a name that meant more than anyone would ever know. To outsiders, it might sound poetic, but to Logan, it represented everything. The fire he once ran into for others, the fire he carried after Claire's passing, and now, the tiny flame flickering inside his son, burning quietly but steadily against all odds. At first, a few people stumbled across the videos, then a few more. Comments trickled in. Mothers of children with special needs, veterans struggling with grief, people who had long forgotten how to hope. This gave me chills. "My daughter just reached for our dog today. I cried watching this. Thank you for reminding us that small miracles are still miracles." The channel grew. So did the community around it. And Aiden, though still without words, still unable to stand, was reaching hearts across the world. At home, the rhythms of life became something beautiful. Mrs. Helen, once a quiet neighbor, became family. She arrived each morning with her thermos of chamomile tea and a warm, motherly smile. She read aloud to Aiden every afternoon, choosing old children's books she had once read to her grandson. Her voice was soft, filled with pauses and warmth, and Aiden listened as if each word was a song written just for him. Some days, she stayed for hours. "I never thought I'd get to love another child again," she told Logan once, wiping a tear from her cheek as she watched Finn curl into Aiden's side. "But your boy, he's a light I didn't know I still needed." Logan didn't say much, but his heart agreed. And in the evenings, after the puppies had eaten and Aiden was tucked beneath his favorite blanket, Logan wrote. Not just updates or captions for the channel, but memories, reflections, letters to Claire. His laptop was filled with half-finished essays, journal entries, and thoughts he once couldn't bear to face. Now, he shared them. One evening, after months of filming, Logan decided to record a video unlike the others. No puppies, no action, just him, sitting beside Aiden, who had fallen asleep on the mat, Willow's head resting gently on his legs. The camera panned slowly as Logan looked down, his voice low, full of weight and wonder. He whispered, "Before you ever walked, you loved. Before you spoke a word, you called out to someone, and before the miracle ever came, you chose to believe." He paused, blinking away tears. The bell on Scout's collar jingled once, as if echoing the moment. "This world told me to prepare for limits. But you've shown me something greater than milestones. You've shown me that love, even when quiet, is still powerful, that a hand reaching across silence is louder than any word. The video ended with the soft sound of Aiden exhaling in sleep. When Logan uploaded it, he titled it, "A Heart That Loved First." And that's exactly what Aiden had done. He hadn't walked, he hadn't spoken clearly, but he had loved, with his eyes, with his fragile hand, with every breath he could manage. He had found his way out of silence, not through therapy sessions or diagnoses, but through the steady, unwavering presence of 3 puppies and a father who refused to give up. The world still had questions. Doctors still had concerns. But Logan had something stronger now. He had faith. And in that small mountain home, surrounded by paws, stories, and the quiet rhythm of hope, he knew. Some children run before they love. But his son loved first. And that changed everything. Sometimes the greatest milestones aren't measured in steps, but in whispers, in the brush of a hand, or a spark in the eyes of a child. As you've seen, Aiden didn't speak like others, or move like others, but he loved in a way that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to Vale Marks, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Your support helps me create more stories that matter, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that even the smallest flame can light the darkest room. Thank you for being part of this journey. The next story might just change your life, too.